Hey everyone, Lauren from A Girl and Her Wool here. Of course, Fibonacci is here too. So today we are dyeing up skein number 2 in our fade dye along. So we are back to dye up skein number 2. Before we head to the dye pots, I just wanted to give a little bit of background. If you haven't seen me dye the first skein, head back to that video and see that one first. It'll give a little bit more context about what we're doing here. And there's also an intro video to the whole series that you can check out as well. But today we are dyeing up skein number 2. This is a 3 skein fade kit that we're dyeing, 1 skein in each video. And after I post the dye with me, I look to you all to comment and use the hashtags to then tell me what we should do with the next skein. So at this point, we've dyed up 2 skeins, and I'm going to just recap here a little bit. So this was our first skein, and the overall before I started theme that people mentioned that they wanted to do was fall, a lot of pinks and greens, and so I brought that out here. We did pink and green kind of variegated base with an overall kind of brown tone to it, and then I speckled kind of some rose color and some green and brown too. So that was skein number 1. And so after I posted this, people wanted to see a lot more deeper rose, browns, and some like the idea of adding purples into it. And so I've gone ahead and dyed up a skein using those comments, and we're gonna head to the dye pots now, and then stick around because I'm gonna show you the finished skein and show you these 2 skeins together, and then we can talk about what we want to do next. Hey everyone, we are back for skein number 2 of our dye fade along. So our second skein in our fade set that we're dyeing up together. You can see I have the water heating up here, but I have not yet put the yarn in, and that is because I'm going to start the skein with a dye bath. So I would have just shown this in my intro, but I have the skein here. It has pinks and that reddish brown greens in it, and I went through and so I went through and read through all of your comments, so thank you all so much who commented. I think it was a lot of fun to read through, and some of the main ideas that I saw while I was reading through was that people in this skein really wanted to see more of the deep, more rose and browns, and then people seem to also kind of like the idea of the purple that I talked about. So we're gonna go for that today. I know there were also a couple of comments about this is me trying to do 2 things at once, talk and pour dye in a pan at the same time. People talked about doing some orange, and while I think we can get there in the 3rd skein, I'm not quite sure if that will fit in the 2nd skein. It might be too big of a jump from the 1st skein if we want to bring in the purples too. So we'll see what the skein looks like towards the end, but we may just stick it out with doing the deeper roses and browns. So what am I doing here? So we're going to start with a dye bath. So you saw I had water, and now I added some red and brown dye to it, which was kind of what was in one of the bottles when we did the first skein. And so if you remember, the base of the first skein had that green and that red in it. So we're gonna remove the green from this skein. We're gonna kind of fade away from the green. We're probably gonna speckle some of the green just to help blend it with the first skein. But the base of this skein is really going to be that reddish brown, and then we're going to bring in the roses and the purple. But I wanted this to kind of be an underlaying layer because half of that skein has this as a base layer, so I thought it would be good to have that for the whole one. Now I'm going to pick up the wet skein, so you're going to hear some dripping here. I have the yarn pre-soaking, And so I'm just gonna put this in, and you'll see it really takes the dye up pretty quickly. So you can see with the dye bath, you really, once you start dipping it in, the yarn really starts to soak it in. And you can see I put a lot of red in there, but you can tell it doesn't necessarily dye the skein completely red. So we get kind of that pinkish, brownish red that we had from the first skein. And I'm just taking it in and out, and you can see the water just getting more and more clear. And so the reason why I'm kind of taking it in and out is that helps, you know, move the dye around and have it settle on different parts. You can already see some of it is darker than others. Oops, no you can't. You can see some of it is darker than others right there. And that is just because of how it soaks it in. So that's kind of how I generally do that dye bath. You can see I've piled it up. A lot of this yarn is not in the water, while a bunch of it is, and so the bottom of it is going to soak up the rest of that dye, and you'll see that dye turn clear. So I'm going to lower it a little bit, and I'm going to let that sit and soak up the rest of that dye. I'm going to put it on a time lapse so that you guys can also see it get soaked up as well. All right, so you can see the water is pretty clear at this point. So it soaked up the dye. You saw I moved it around a little bit. That was just to make sure none of it got too dark, but you know, you can see it's a nice tonal color. We have some lighter parts. There are definitely some of the darker parts. And so it just makes a good base tonal color. So again, that will help us fade from this color because it has a lot of that similar quality. This is a little bit brighter, and that's because we had the brown in the last skein. So I'm actually going to, So I'm actually going to now put some brown in there to mute it down a little bit, similar to what we did with the last one, again, just to kind of make it match. So I am going to just speckle some of this on there, and then we will be right back. All right, so again, I speckled it on there, but I wanted to blend in a little bit more. Again, I want to kind of mute down most of the skein. So again, I could have made another dye bath with it, but I'm also okay with it being a little splotchy because that's how we did it in the first skein. And we don't want the style of the skein to change too much because we are hoping for this to become a set. So we have some brown, and I'm just, again, I've said this a million times, but I'm doing just a little bit at a time because you can always add more. All right, so that's probably good for now, and we can come back with it later. So again, adding the brown just will mute down some of this reddish brown that we made in the dye bath, and there is some dye now in the water too, so it will continue to soak that in. All right, so I think that matches pretty good in terms of just a similar family. And let's just get some of the rose and some of the purple going, and then we'll do some speckling and call it done. I don't want this to become too dark because the last skein is not that dark, and so I don't want to add too much. Again, a little bit at a time. So I don't want it to become too dark because then if you were to knit or crochet with it, then it would end up striping too much. So we want it to fade nicely without kind of changing too much at a time. So I am just grabbing some of the dye color that I used last time to get some of those rose splotches on there, and so we're gonna just add more of that, and then I'm actually probably going to blend some of the purple in a bottle just to make sure we don't get too dark, but I just want some of that rose in there, and I'm gonna move it around and add more, but we're gonna let that set. And while that is setting, I'm going to mix up a bottle, so I will be right back. Okay, so you may or may not be able to notice, but I actually dumped out some of the water, and that's because I just want to have more control over the skein. And so when you have less yarn underwater, you have more control over it because the water won't kind of leak into the dye bath and run away. So I did lower it. It is steaming up a lot. Okay, so all I did was mix up this bottle. Again, when I mix up bottles, it's because one, I want more control, and then also because I want to mix up a couple of colors, which is what I've done here. So I have a couple of colors in here, and we're gonna just spray some of that around. And I find that this purple needs to sit and heat up. So it might look like a pretty light purple right now, but once it starts to heat up a little bit, you'll see it become a darker purple. So we're gonna let that sit. Again, I wanna do a little bit at a time because I don't wanna overwhelm the skein and make it too dark and therefore not contrast too much with the first skein. I'm actually going to cover it just to make sure the heat gets on top of there, and we'll come right back. So gave that a few minutes. I'm gonna move it around and add a little bit more. We'll also be speckling at the end, so we'll bring some more of the purple out with that. So again, we're gonna just speckle some of the rose and then pour on some of the purple. So I'm gonna time lapse you while I do that. Hey everyone, so while I did the time lapse, I actually covered it up and let it sit for just like a minute or two. There was a question on the previous post about knowing when the dye is set, so I wanted to talk through that for a little bit. Let me just move my bucket of water out of the way. So I wanted to talk about that really quickly. So one, we saw the dye bath, we saw the yarn kind of like soak up all the dye. So typically with that, when you move the skein around in the dye bath, you can see the dye moving around and you'll know it's not set. And the same is true with this. So you can see I speckled, and let me zoom in on some speckles here. So, okay, so you can see kind of that area of speckles. So one thing that I do to kind of see if the speckles are set is I just kind of like tap at it a little bit, and you can see in this bit right here it became cloudy, right? It's no longer spotted, it's more like a cloud of dye, and so that's how I know that those speckles aren't yet set. So I'll let it sit for a little bit longer, but you can even tell, like, and I know I zoomed in, but see there's the purple here, or maybe showing it down here is good. If you kind of push the yarn into the water, you'll see the dye kind of bleed off of it and then start moving around. So this purple actually looks okay, and that's probably because it's in the water, so it's getting heated up more, and it really needs the heat to set. So even these speckles here, which I think are still on the camera, these are some of the rose speckles. Those are pretty much staying put. So because of these are out of the water, that's why I like to cover it up and let it kind of steam it and move it around. I don't think you can see those off camera. So these, so they're pretty, so those are still also staying pretty good. Those are some of the rose speckles. I guess they're all the rose speckles, but yeah, so those ones are staying pretty good. So it's really just this big high kind of mountain of yarn there that's not. So I am going to give it a few more minutes. So I just cover it back up and give it a few more minutes to kind of... Okay, so we're still zoomed in here, and I wanted to just show you a difference now. So it really has only been a few minutes. It doesn't take that long, and I guess I had it setting before, but this is kind of like that cloud we kind of pushed on before. But if you look at these speckles here, if I push them down into the water, they're pretty much staying as dotted speckles, which is what we want. I don't mind if it blends a little bit because you know, the rose can blend in a little bit. I'm fine with that. Also, something to keep in mind too, and I'm going to come back to the whole idea of setting in a second, but when you have like one dot, so even here, and I think this part's still on camera, and I will zoom out, but if you look at that dot right there, when you're knitting, that dot is barely going to show. And so if you want like speckling in your yarn, you want those dots to kind of stay. If you want speckling in your knitting, a more cloud-like section like this is actually going to speckle your yarn, because if you separate this, there's a lot of strands of yarn here, and I've talked about this in my Dye With Me videos before. And if I were to pick up just like one strand of this, you see how little dye, that's actually 2 strands right there, and you can see how little of that speckle is on there. That's going to be 1 stitch. So that's something to just remember too. You don't need the little dots on there to get a speckle when you're knitting, unless you're going for the speckled look on your skein. And just coming back to the idea of setting, sorry, I have other skeins going on the other side of the stove here, is once I call a skein done, I really let it sit and cool in the water. And so to me, that's kind of when the skein is finishing its setting. And I'll let that go for hours. So I'll dye, you know, if I dye sometime during the day, I'll let it set and basically until like I'm going to bed, and then I'll rinse the skeins and hang them up to dry. So I let them sit for a few hours and cool completely before I rinse them. So that's like something else to keep in mind with the setting. It's not just about seeing the dye not move around in the water. It's really a good idea to just like let it sit and marinate and just make sure that the dye is not going to bleed out. So I just flip the skein over. I'm going to do the same thing with the rose speckles and spray some of the purple, and then we're going to do our final speckle layer. One last topic about the setting, and I appreciate who asked the question, and I forget now who it was, but one last thing on the topic before we kind of move on is, you know, I said you don't necessarily want to see the dots, right? Like that really won't show up, whereas when you get a splotch, you'll get more of the speckling in the knitting. Something though you would just want to keep in mind is if the dots, you know, if you take that to mean as the dots can kind of move around a little bit, it's true. But what you don't want is, so like in this case, I don't want to move the skein around too much before those have set, because I don't want the dye to bleed into the water and then give this overall skein a different feel. So while you don't necessarily need the dots to have remained, you do still want to make sure the dye is staying put on the skein, so that way you stay in control of it. Ooh. So I don't know why I'm doing this without gloves. So again, I don't want the skein to get too dark. It's already kind of getting there. So we have lighter sections and we have the more speckled sections, but I still want to speckle a little bit of the green on there, and then I do just want to flat out speckle some of the purple. So we sprayed some of the purple to give it an underlying tone of the purple, but I also just want to put some speckles on there to bring out the purple a little bit. And then I'm going to also speckle some of the same green that we speckled last time, just to tie it in that much more to the first skein and help with that fade. And again, I don't want to darken it up too much, so we won't do a ton, but I do want to get some in there. So again, I'm going to flip this over to a time lapse, and so you can see me speckle. All right, so I speckled green and purple, and I really only did it on the yarn above the water. Again, I don't want the green to really bleed into the skein too much. I really want it to stay as speckles, and so I'm just repiling it up, and I'm gonna do a little bit more of the same. I don't want too much green, but I definitely want more purple, so I'm gonna do a little bit of green and then a bunch more purple. And I wanted to mention again that I am dyeing this up on my BFL sock base, which is a BFL superwash BFL nylon blend. And for the people commenting on the videos or using the hashtag, one person will be selected from all of the so there will be one winner from all of the comments from all the videos to win the set that I'm actually dyeing up in these videos. The sets themselves are also available in my shop, so you can go check that out. Every time one of these video posts, the discount goes down, so when you're seeing this, it'll now be discounted at 10% off, and that will be through when I post skein number 3, and then it'll be at full price. And I'm not sure how long the sets will actually stay in the shop. Because they're fall themed, honestly, they'll probably stay up for a little bit, but they'll be at that full price. So if you are interested in it, definitely grab it now while you can get that discount. Because it's 3 skeins, it's a pretty good deal. And you choose the size of your skeins. So if you want 100-gram skeins, go for it. If you just want minis, go for that too. And I will be dyeing them all up once the 3rd video posts. So because I don't know what the 3rd skein is going to look like. You guys are going to tell me. So make sure in this video you comment on what you want the 3rd skein to look like. Do we want to bring in some oranges? If we do, it'll be like a burnt orange. Like I definitely would put the orange and then, you know, make it darker with some brown. Or do we just want to do like a full purple skein? So let me know what you want to see. Again, once we have this dry, I'll kind of talk through some ideas that I will have. But otherwise, this is mostly done. Again, I don't want it to get too dark. The skeins do dry lighter, I find, so always keep that in mind. And yeah, so I'm gonna again do a final time lapse. I'm going to just move it around and make sure it's all speckled all the way through on all sides. I'm not going to do any more green at this point, but I might just do some more rose and some more purple and go from there. So stay tuned because I'm going to show and talk through it being dry and what that means moving forward in the next video. So stay tuned. Okay, so who wants to see the finished skein? I haven't cut all the ties out, so you might see some of those, but here it is. So this is the finished skein, and again, I love how this came out. It is definitely fall themed. Again, so what did we do? We did that dye bath with a base layer of that really brownish red, which you see a lot of that in here. We gave it kind of that brown overtone, so that kind of made it more of a brown base. And then we sprayed some purples on there, so you see a lot of the purples in there. And we speckled the rose, which you kind of see those darker bits all throughout the skein. And then we also added some of the green in. And part of the reason why I wanted to speckle the green in is so that when these two are knitted up together, we would see the progression, and it would blend a little bit more. So this is the skein. I definitely think it has that purple, rose, brown feel, but I think it'll fade really well in with this skein. So these are the two of them together. So you can definitely see this one is darker. I didn't want it to get too dark, which it doesn't. So you definitely have the lighter sections of the skein. So when these are knit together, you'll get some blending in there, but it will progress into this color. So while this one has more of like those reds and green feel, this definitely moves into a more purple base, which I think worked out really, really well. So they're not too similar of skeins, but they do blend well together. And again, just talking through kind of some of those techniques. So for this one, we sprayed a lot of the reds and the greens on there. This one we did more of a tonal base, and so that kind of gave this one that more solid color. But then again, we blended some more purples, browns, and the rose to just kind of change up the overall feel. So I think that worked pretty well. Probably in the third video, or actually I probably will do a recap. I'll open up all the skeins so we can kind of look at that as it's all complete, but for now these are them in the skeins. So direction of where we want to go next. So I kind of talked about this a little bit while we were dyeing, but we could go full on purple, so I can do a purple base and then add darker speckles to it. People did talk about wanting to see more oranges. Now that you kind of see how these go together, let me know if that's still a way you're kind of thinking of moving with this skein. And yeah, so let me know what you want to see next. I really am enjoying making this kind of based on really what you guys are saying. I have no idea what skein number 3 is going to look like, and I really won't have an idea until I read through your comments. And I really do try to take them all into account. So, you know, people really wanted the darker rose, the darker browns, which you definitely see a lot of that in here. And yeah, overall fall theme. So make sure you comment below with what you want to see in the third skein. Again, as you see these colors and if you start to think of ideas of what you would do with them, certainly comment with them below. I love looking up all of the patterns. And if you have any questions, so today I talked a lot about knowing when the dye is set and kind of pointing that out. If you have any questions about anything I talked about or anything in my dye process, certainly let me know and I will answer them. I can also look to do more of a dye Q&A if there's interest for that. And then the last thing I just wanted to talk about was, while I am happy with how this skein turned out, I have to admit this was not my first attempt. So I actually filmed a couple of dye with me's, and I think because I don't want to make this video too long, I wanted to make this video about this one. I didn't talk about that during the video, but what I'm thinking about doing is kind of after this series wraps up, then I can talk about kind of what went wrong, what I didn't like, and what I was more looking for in the skein. If you guys are interested in seeing that, I know it's nice to kind of show like me dyeing and then it came out and here's what it looks like, but I also want to show kind of things that happen when you're dyeing that maybe it's not the effect that you were originally going for. So let me know if you guys are interested in seeing that, and I hope you like how this fade is going. And again, let me know what you want to see in skein number 3. That video will go up in 2 weeks, and like I mentioned in the video, these kits are available in my shop. They're now discounted at 10%, and they will stay there until 2 weeks from now when the third video posts. So I will see you all then, and in the meantime, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I post other crafty related topics, whether it's about my projects, or this week it's actually going to be some shop news. So a lot of fall is happening in the shop, and I'm going to have some new bases, so check out that video for some exciting announcements. So I am going to get going, and I hope you all have a great week, and I will see you soon. Bye.